When you look at the digital world today, it's just dominated, isn't it, by these huge tech empires.
Mm,
Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Meta.
absolutely. They're enormous.
And you have to wonder, how did they get so big? It can't just be about having, like, a slightly better product, can it?
No, no, not at all. The scale we see now, it wasn't just luck or technical brilliance alone. Our sources really dig into this. There was a very deliberate, often pretty aggressive playbook right from the start.
A playbook.
Yeah, we're talking about the core strategies, the personalities involved, the whole competitive environment these founders built around themselves right from the very beginning.
Okay, so that's what we're diving into today. We've looked at sources covering the founders, Gates, Jobs, Bezos, Zuckerberg.
The big ones.
Exactly. And our mission here is to sort of unpack that shared DNA, that tactical approach. You mentioned aggressive, relentless. Standard setting seems key too.
Hmm.
These tactics really defined early tech capitalism, didn't they? And they set the stage for the market we have now.
They absolutely did. This is about understanding the minds that built the machine, giving you that shortcut.
So if we're talking about the foundations of this playbook, Bill Gates seems like the obvious starting point.
Oh, absolutely. You really have to start with Gates. His whole personality, his drive. It seems like it was forged in this environment where he constantly had to prove how smart he was, like instantly.
Yeah, the sources trace that back to his school days, right?
Yeah.
At Lakeside School. It's kind of fascinating that this intense competitiveness partly came from trying to stand out among kids who apparently found him, well, a bit much.
Yeah, insufferably bright is a phrase that comes up. And the
Yeah.
stories are really telling. He got teased. There's that famous one from the carpool.
Oh, the small man, small joke one.
That's the one, an older kid holding his fingers apart. You know, that kind of thing constantly pushes you to demand respect, to prove yourself, especially when your genius is technical, not social.
And that need to dominate, to win every single interaction, that clearly carried over into his professional life.
Completely. It became central to his style.
And this intensity wasn't just talk, was it? I mean, look at the basic development for the 8080 chip. That's legendary stuff.
Pure pressure cooker creation.
Yeah.
It was sheer competitive need. Gates and Paul Allen, they basically told Ed Roberts at MIT they had a basic interpreter.
Even though they hadn't actually written it yet.
Not a line. So they had to deliver like yesterday. And the focus Gates showed, it was something else. 8 weeks. He basically dropped out of Harvard, didn't go to classes.
Which for him must have been huge.
Massive. But even more telling, he gave up poker, his beloved poker games.
Wow.
Yeah, his poker buddies knew instantly this project was serious. Deadly serious. He just locked himself away and coded.
And pulled it off. Did what Intel experts said couldn't be done for that chip.
Exactly. Developed a high-level language under impossible constraints.
But that same intensity, that aggression, it wasn't always an asset, was it? Did it backfire?
Oh, definitely. It absolutely did. The same drive that made him a programming machine also made him, pretty difficult to deal with for a lot of early partners.
Like Roberts at MIT's.
Yeah. Roberts respected the output, the code, but he described Gates as impossible to deal with, called him a spoiled kid, just found his negotiation style, his management approach way too aggressive.
He preferred Paul Allen, didn't he?
Much preferred Aller. Saw him as more creative, more collaborative. Roberts apparently tried to keep Gates out of meetings whenever he could.
It sounds like that temper wasn't just a personality quirk. It actually cost them business.
We have concrete examples. The sources detail this one time where Gates and another Microsoft guy, Smith, were on a call trying to close a deal with an Intel subsidiary.
Yeah.
And someone mentioned that another part of Intel had complained about Microsoft delivering something late. Gates got triggered.
Oh.
Instead of handling it smoothly, strategically, he just lost it. Let his temper flare unchecked right there on the conference call.
And the deal.
Gone. Alienated the client completely, cost them the contract. It shows how that personal aggression was baked into how the company operated, sometimes, hurting them.
Okay, so the intensity was the fuel, but what was the actual plan? The blueprint for dominating the market?
It boiled down to this really simple but incredibly powerful motto. Something Gates made sure was, quote, burned into his company's psyche.
Which was?
We set the standard. That was it. It wasn't about just being a leader or one of the players. It was about defining the entire environment everyone else had to operate in.
Control the operating system, control the rules.
Exactly. Win control of the languages and, critically, the OS. That meant everyone else had to play by Microsoft's rules, follow their standards.
And those early standard-setting products, BASIC and MS-DOS, They became the financial engine, right?
Absolutely. They weren't just software. They were, as the sources call them, cash cows. Reliable, hugely profitable income streams.
And that money funded everything else.
It funded the breakneck growth. It meant Microsoft could push into totally new, much riskier areas, especially application software, starting around '82. They didn't need outside investors. They had this internal engine pumping out cash.
But moving into applications while also controlling the operating system. That's where the big conflict started, isn't it? What competitors called the church and state issue.
Yes. We really need to dig into this because it gets to the heart of the strategic advantage, maybe even unfairness.
Okay, let's unpack it.
So you had competitors like WordPerfect, huge in word processing then, and Lotus with their spreadsheets.
Yeah, Lotus 123, dominant.
Right. But both of them and others were completely dependent on Microsoft's operating systems. First DOS, then Windows.
They needed Microsoft's platform to run.
Exactly. And the strong suspicion, which often became outright accusation, was that Microsoft's own application teams, the people building Word and Excel, were getting sneak previews.
Previews of what? Changes to the OS?
Changes to the underlying code, the APIs, the architecture of DOS and Windows. The idea was they got this information way before the outside developers, like Lotus or WordPerfect.
So the implication is Microsoft's app teams knew what was coming.
Months in advance, potentially. They could tailor their own software, Word and Excel, to work perfectly with the next version of Windows or DOS before the competition even knew what those changes were.
It's like getting the course map months before the race starts.
That's a great analogy. Even if it was just a few weeks head start, think about it. That's enough time to optimize your code, fix bugs, make sure your product runs flawlessly on launch day while everyone else is scrambling.
It's a huge advantage.
Massive. It basically allowed Microsoft to ensure its applications were always first and best on its own platform.
Did Microsoft try to address these complaints? I remember hearing about briefings for developers, maybe an ombudsperson.
They did make efforts, yes. They held technical briefings. They hired someone internally to sort of mediate disputes with third-party developers. But structurally, how do you really police that flow of information inside a company?
It seems almost impossible to prove definitively.
And crucially, the legal thinking at the time, and this is really key for understanding the later antitrust battles, was that this internal advantage, while devastating for competitors,
Wasn't actually illegal.
probably not. Under antitrust law, as it was interpreted then, it was seen as just an inherent benefit of controlling both the platform and the applications. You were allowed to leverage your platform dominance to help your other products.
Wow. So that playbook element, using platform control to favor your own apps, that was baked in early on.
Absolutely. And it became a massive headache for competitors and eventually for regulators trying to figure out how to ensure a level playing field. #tag division and risk in Windows development.
Let's talk about Windows itself. The commitment Gates showed to it, especially when it wasn't an immediate hit. That's pretty remarkable.
Staggering, really. It shows this refusal to give up on a strategic vision, no matter how much it cost or who pushed back.
And that vision started with a big investment, didn't it? Studying the Xerox star.
Yeah, his foresight there was incredible. He spent $100,000, a huge amount back then, on a Xerox Star computer and a laser printer.
Which wasn't even a commercial success itself.
No, the Star failed in the market.
Oh.
But it had the core concepts of the graphical user interface. Windows, icons, menus, pointers, what we now just call a GUI. Gates studied that machine obsessively. It was the blueprint for Windows.
So he was willing to spend big just to understand a competitor's failed but technically advanced idea.
Exactly. Invest heavily to learn from superior technology, even if it didn't sell.
But pushing that vision internally, making the switch to graphical interfaces,
Yeah.
that caused some serious friction, especially around Excel.
Oh, major friction, huge resistance. See, when Gates fully committed to the UI future, he made a really controversial call. He decided that Excel, which was meant to be Microsoft's killer app, its answer to Lotus 123,
Yeah.
would be developed for the Apple Macintosh first.
Well, the Mac.
Yeah.
His rival's machine.
Yes, because the Mac already had a working graphical interface. Developing Excel for Mac first was the fastest way for Microsoft to get a flagship GUI application into the market and learn how to build them.
But what about the PC version? Were people working on that?
They were. Months of intense coding work had already gone into the PC version of Excel. A programmer named Doug Clunder was leading that team.
So this decision basically threw all their work out.
Pretty much. Clunder was, by all accounts, absolutely furious. He saw it as a complete betrayal, abandoning months of hard work, intellectual effort.
I imagine.
He apparently threatened to quit right there on the spot, and he did end up leaving a few months later, but Gates wouldn't budge.
Why not? Why risk losing key talent?
Because he saw the bigger picture. Dominating the application market, even if it meant using Apple's platform temporarily, was crucial. It would prove the value of the graphical interface, build expertise, and pave the way for Windows to eventually take over on the PC.
It was a long game.
A very long game, and
Wow.
incredibly persistent. That commitment to Windows, it took 6 years. Cost maybe $100 million.
$100 million back then for Microsoft?
Yeah.
That's astronomical.
It was a massive bet, and for a long time it looked like a losing one. At one point they'd shipped something like 3 million copies of early Windows versions,
No.
and they were basically just gathering dust. Nobody was really using them. They weren't popular.
Yet he kept going.
He doggedly hung in with Windows, as one source puts it. The vision wasn't just short-term profit. It was about making the PC fundamentally easier to use, like the Mac, and ensuring Microsoft controlled that essential user experience for decades to come.
So the lesson there is, standard setting isn't just about aggression. It requires incredible vision and financial staying power.
Absolutely. Relentless drive and the willingness to endure years, potentially a decade, of cost and uncertainty to see it through.
Okay, so Gates is betting the company on graphical interfaces with Windows. How did Steve Jobs react when he found out Microsoft was essentially building its own version of the Mac's world?
Oh, Jobs was furious. Pure, unadulterated rage. He saw it as blatant theft, an absolute betrayal.
What did he do?
The sources describe him essentially summoning Gates to Cupertino. A command performance, they called it. Gates had to fly down and explain himself.
Must have been tense.
You can imagine. Gates apparently showed up alone, didn't really apologize, and just laid it out. Told Jobs flatly, we're betting our company on graphical interfaces.
Oh, just admitting it.
Yeah, that moment right there crystallized it for both of them. They were locked in this fight to the death over the future of the desktop.
It's such a fascinating rivalry. And what's interesting about Jobs is, even after Apple became this huge, successful corporation, he managed to keep that rebel image alive for the brand.
That was brilliant marketing, wasn't it? Pure mythology building, those Think Different campaigns.
Iconic.
They perfectly tapped into Jobs' original counterculture vibe. It allowed Apple, and crucially the people spending thousands on their machines, to feel like they were still part of something revolutionary, something anti-establishment.
Even as they were buying products from one of the biggest companies on earth, run by a billionaire.
Exactly. The brand managed to maintain that us against them underdog feeling long after it was actually true. It was strategically cultivated.
But behind the scenes, that sort of revolutionary spirit clashed with his management style, right? He wasn't exactly keen on sharing control.
Not at all. Deeply ingrained unwillingness to cede control. There's a great example from a 1984 strategy meeting.
What happened?
Jobs proposed this really radical idea. He wanted to force the central corporate departments, like sales, marketing, to essentially bid for the right to work with the product divisions, like the Macintosh Group.
So the Mac team could just hire their own marketers if they didn't like the central team.
Precisely. They could bypass the established corporate structure entirely if they thought they could deduct themselves.
That sounds disruptive.
Hugely disruptive. It basically threatened the power base of almost every executive outside the product teams. Predictably, it met massive resistance.
But Jobs pushed it.
Kept pushing it, trying to force it through. It got to the point where people were apparently wondering aloud why the CEO, John Sculley, wasn't just telling him to shut up. It really showed Jobs' instinct to break rules, control his immediate environment, even if it created chaos elsewhere in the company.
Okay, let's shift gears to the next wave. Jeff Bezos. His focus wasn't really interfaces or operating systems. It was about conquering the sheer scale of the internet itself. Right? Especially during the dot-com boom.
Yeah, his core strategy then was pure land grab. That's the term they used.
Land grab, like claiming territory.
Exactly. Bezos saw the internet as this vast, uncharted space. Amazon's mission, in his view, was to move fast and carve out the biggest parcel of territory possible. Get big, fast.
And the goal wasn't just selling books anymore.
No, the goal became much bigger, to be the first place people went to find and discover anything they want to buy. Scale was everything. Speed was everything. Profitability. That could wait. That was a problem for later.
And a key part of that scaling strategy was aggressive pricing. Famously, the ebooks.
Ah, yes. The $9.99 flat price for bestsellers. That was a classic Bezos move. He called it a gut call.
Inspired by Apple's music pricing.
Yeah, the 99 cents per song model. But strategically, with ebooks, it was incredibly aggressive because Amazon was actually losing money on nearly every sale.
Okay.
They were buying the books wholesale from publishers for maybe $15, sometimes more, and selling them for 9.99 cents, losing $5 or more per book.
How is that sustainable?
Yeah.
How is losing money on potentially millions of sales a strategy?
It wasn't just a discount. It was, you could argue, bordering on predatory pricing. The goal was twofold. First, hammer into consumers' minds the expectation that digital books should be cheaper, that they would expect and deserve lower prices.
Create the market perception.
Exactly. And second, those losses were leverage against the publishers. By showing they were willing and able to absorb massive losses on these sales, Amazon put immense pressure on publishers to eventually lower their wholesale prices.
Force their hand.
Right. It was a war of attrition, funded by Amazon's deep pockets, aimed at completely restructuring the economics of the entire publishing industry to fit Amazon's model.
And Bezos actually believed that this focus on super low margins acted as a kind of defense mechanism against other big tech players.
Yeah, it's a fascinating insight into corporate thinking. He figured the established giants, IBM, Microsoft, even Google, would be reluctant to jump into Amazon's core market, retail.
Why? They had the resources.
Because retail, especially the way Amazon did it, was such a low-margin business. Competing head-on would mean accepting much lower profit margins than they were used to in software or advertising. It would actually depress their overall profit margins.
Which looks bad to Wall Street.
Exactly. So those high-margin giants would hesitate or be slow to enter the fray because it would dilute their own shiny financial results. The low margins became a kind of moat.
But that aggression wasn't just aimed at competitors or suppliers. It caused friction even with major partners like Toys R Us.
Oh yeah, the Toys R Us lawsuit is a perfect example of how Amazon's ultimate priority customer selection could override everything else, even contracts.
What was the deal there?
Toys R Us had signed this big, exclusive, multi-year deal to be the only seller of toys on Amazon.com.
Okay, seems straightforward.
But Amazon was obsessed with offering the absolute widest selection possible. So even with that exclusive deal in place, they kept finding ways, kept introducing new features that allowed other third-party sellers to list toys on the site, directly competing with Toys R Us.
Undermining their own exclusive partner.
Completely, because the goal of Earth's biggest selection was more important than the contractual obligation to Toys R Us. Predictably, Toys R Us sued. It showed that for Amazon, even major partnerships were secondary if they stood in the way of total market dominance and selection.
All right, moving into the social media era. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Speed seems to have been an almost existential concern from early on.
Absolutely obsessed with speed, performance speed. He was terrified of Facebook becoming the next Friendster.
Friendstered.
Yeah.
The cautionary tale.
Exactly. Friendster was the early social network that basically collapsed under its own weight because it couldn't scale, it was too slow. Zuckerberg was determined not to let that happen.
How did he enforce that?
He actually put a little timer on every single Facebook page, visible internally, showing the load time in milliseconds. A constant reminder to every engineer. Speed matters. He famously said he needed servers just as much as I need food. It wasn't just about user experience, it was survival.
And that speed allowed Facebook to constantly iterate, right, to pursue this goal of dominating people's online time.
Precisely. The strategy became capture more and more of the time people spend on the internet. And that meant not just improving Facebook itself, but actively working to undermine any potential competitors popping up in the social space.
Constant evolution and aggressive defense.
Yeah, a very tactical, almost military approach to controlling the social landscape.
And the core asset underpinning all of this was the social graph. We hear that term a lot, but what did it really mean strategically for Facebook?
The social graph was their unique insight, their core value. Technically, yeah, it's nodes people connected by edges friendships. But strategically, it was their ultimate, most powerful distribution mechanism.
How so?
Think about it. When Facebook rolled out a new feature, or allowed a new game or app onto the platform, its spread wasn't dependent on advertising buys. It spread organically, virally, through the existing network of friendships.
The network effect on steroids.
Exactly. And once you've mapped the relationships between, eventually billions of people, you've created this massive, almost insurmountable barrier to entry. How does a new social network compete when all the connections, all the friends are already on Facebook?
It's incredibly difficult to replicate that.
Virtually impossible at scale. That graph became the engine that fueled growth, but also stifled competition. It made it incredibly hard for anyone else to gain traction.
So beyond advertising, how did Zuckerberg envision making money from this incredibly valuable asset in the long run?
The long-term vision definitely included consumer monetization, getting users to pay Facebook directly for things.
Like what?
Well, they were already experimenting with selling virtual goods. Think like paying $1 for a virtual birthday cake you could post on a friend's wall. Silly, maybe, but scalable.
Okay.
And they talked about potentially having an on-site currency system. The projections were pretty ambitious, forecasting maybe 20–30% of total revenue eventually coming from these direct consumer payments, not just ads.
So the vision was building a whole internal economy.
Yeah, controlling not just the social connections, but the commerce happening within that ecosystem.
Yeah.
A self-contained world.
It's really striking how this intense winner-take-all mindset isn't just in tech businesses. We see it mirrored in high-stakes science, too, like the race to develop CRISPR gene editing.
Oh, the CRISPR story is a fantastic parallel. The competition between Jennifer Donna's lab and Feng Zhang's lab at the Broad Institute. It had all the same elements of urgency and rivalry.
Duna felt that pressure intensely, right?
Yeah, she did. She understood the power of the Cas9 system. She knew, quote, if Cas9 is a robust technology for human genome editing, then the world changes. That realization drove her to push her team, telling them they had to speed up. The prize wasn't just market share, it was, Nobel-level discovery and potentially changing medicine forever.
But the rivalry went beyond just being first. There was a bit of scientific snipe involved, wasn't there, about what counted as a real breakthrough?
Yes, exactly. The tension with Feng Zhang's group was really clear. Zhang somewhat dismissed the initial Dinde Charpentier paper. He called it just a biochemistry experiment in a test tube.
Ouch, what was his point?
His point, and his lab's focus, was on demonstrating CRISPR worked in actual cells, human cells specifically. He argued that showing it worked in the complex environment of a living cell was the real hurdle, the truly significant step, implying that the test tube work, while interesting, wasn't the practical breakthrough.
So it became a fight over defining success. Was it the initial discovery or the first demonstration of practical application in a relevant biological system?
Precisely. It wasn't just about publishing first. It was about whose work was deemed more significant, more immediately impactful.
And yet, the sources say this competition continued, even when the goal shifted towards something humanitarian.
It really highlights the complex nature of this kind of competition. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, both labs instantly pivoted. They didn't stop competing, they just raced to apply CRISPR in a new way.
Oh.
They both rushed to develop and publish papers on using CRISPR as a basis for rapid, cheap diagnostic tests for the coronavirus, basically neck and neck producing similar work.
But presumably with the goal of helping.
Yes, and crucially, both labs made efforts to ensure their discoveries in this area were shared openly and freely. So here you see intense rivalry actually accelerating the development of tools potentially beneficial to everyone. Competition driving rapid, shared innovation in a crisis. Hashtag B. The global stakes of AI power.
Okay, let's zoom out from the lab to the global stage.
Yeah.
The competition over artificial intelligence, particularly between the US and China, seems to be entering a new phase where data is the ultimate resource.
Data is absolutely the new oil, the fuel for AI dominance. And China is building this incredible, perhaps unprecedented data advantage.
Yeah.
It comes from what the sources call China's unique datascape. Think about their integrated digital ecosystem, WeChat for everything, massive mobile payment adoption, ride sharing, bike sharing, all generating these incredibly rich, real-world interactions at a scale we just don't see in the West.
Because our data is more siloed.
Yeah.
Facebook has some, Google has some, Amazon has others.
Exactly. It's fragmented. In China, because of the dominance of platforms like Tencent and Alibaba and government access, there's potentially a much more unified, comprehensive pool of data capturing daily life.
And that massive data set is what powers AI development.
It's the critical ingredient. In the era of deep learning, often the sheer amount and quality of data you use to train your AI model is more important than having a slightly cleverer algorithm initially. So this data advantage gives Chinese companies and researchers a potentially huge leg up.
So it's a geopolitical race fueled by data.
Absolutely. The AI revolution has massive geopolitical implications.
And the economic impact. The sources predict it won't just be blue-collar jobs affected this time. It's going to hit white-collar work hard too, right? And worsen inequality.
That's the really sobering prediction. We often focus on automation in factories or driving, but AI is getting very good at tasks previously considered safe white-collar work.
Like what kind of tasks?
Things involving pattern recognition, data analysis, translation, even writing code, doing legal discovery work, financial analysis. A lot of well-paid jobs in both the US and China could be significantly impacted or even displaced.
And because the AI technology and the resulting wealth are likely to be concentrated in just a few giant companies and skilled individuals.
The fear is a tremendous acceleration of wealth inequality, even faster and on a larger scale than what we saw with the internet revolution. The gap between the AI haves and have-nots could become immense.
Given these huge stakes, economic disruption, geopolitical power shifts. What's the takeaway regarding responsibility, particularly for the U.S. and China?
Well, thinkers and investors in this space, like Kai-Fu Lee, are basically calling for both countries to step up, to recognize and really embrace the great responsibilities that come with significant technological power.
Meaning what exactly?
Saying it's not just about winning the race anymore, it's about managing the transition, thinking about global stability, ensuring transparency, developing ethical guidelines, dealing with the societal consequences of technologies that will reshape billions of lives. The power these AI leaders will wield goes way beyond just business.
You know, this challenge of dealing with immense corporate power isn't entirely new. There are historical parallels. John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil seem like a key precedent.
Absolutely. Rockefeller was a genius not just at business, but at managing public perception, managing the politics of monopoly.
He didn't actually try to control 100% of the oil market, did he?
No, and that was deliberate. He strategically aimed for maybe 90%, consciously leaving about 10% of the refining and marketing business to what he called feeble competition.
Feeble competition. He let smaller, weaker rivals exist. Why would a monopolist do that? It seems counterintuitive.
Because he was politically savvy. He understood that achieving absolute 100% control would create an immediate and overwhelming public and political backlash. He basically admitted they let others survive because public sentiment would be against us if we actually refined all the oil.
So a calculated move. Tolerate a tiny bit of competition to avoid looking like a total monster.
Exactly. It was optics management. A political strategy to ensure the public perceived there was still some competition, which helped diffuse the pressure for aggressive antitrust action, keep the regulators at bay.
But eventually, the government did go after Standard Oil, the big 1911 antitrust case. What was the outcome of that? Did it satisfy the reformers?
It was seen as a landmark case, sure, a demonstration that the government could theoretically break up a massive trust. But many reformers at the time were deeply critical of the result.
Why? What was wrong with breaking it up?
Critics like Senator La Follette or William Jennings Bryan felt the court had been too lenient. They argued the court had waited years only to, quote, throw his protecting arms around the trusts and tell them how to escape.
How did they escape?
The breakup essentially divided Standard Oil into smaller regional companies. Standard Oil of New Jersey, Exxon, Standard Oil of New York, Mobil, Standard Oil of California, Chevron, and so on. The criticism was that these were still huge, powerful entities that continued to dominate their respective markets. It wasn't seen as creating true, vibrant competition.
So the lesson some took was that regulation could be kind of superficial. It looked tough, but didn't fundamentally change the power structure.
That was certainly the critique, that it taught big business how to structure themselves to appear competitive while maintaining effective control. Hashtag BBE, defining corporate responsibility.
This history raises a really fundamental question that some of our sources address. When bad things happen because of concentrated corporate power, like high prices for consumers, or innovation getting stifled, who's really to blame?
Yeah, there's a fascinating perspective, particularly from sources looking at business tycoons in Southeast Asia. They put forward this idea that businessmen fundamentally are just highly effective traders in rent-offering environments.
Rent-offering environments, what does that mean?
Environments where there are opportunities to make excess profits, often due to regulation, lack of competition, or political connections, economic rents. The argument is that the businessman's job, their function, is simply to make money within the rules of the game as they exist.
Okay, so if their actions lead to negative outcomes.
The blame, according to this view, shouldn't fall on the businessman for playing the game effectively. It should fall squarely on the politicians, the regulators, the policymakers who create or allow those rent-offering environments, those flawed rules of the game to exist in the first place.
So it's the government's job to set fair rules and defend society's interests,
Yeah.
and if they fail, that's on them, not the company maximizing profit within those rules.
That's the argument. It shifts the primary responsibility for societal outcomes away from the corporation and onto the state.
And we see examples of how established power can be used to maintain that environment, even beyond just pricing or market tactics, like the Richard Branson story with Virgin Atlantic.
That's a classic case study. Branson was trying to expand Virgin Atlantic, challenging the dominance of British Airways.
And BA didn't like that.
Not one bit. According to Branson and others, BA didn't just compete on price or service, they resorted to what were called dirty tricks. This involved legal maneuvering, spreading rumors, things designed to make life difficult for Virgin.
How did that stop expansion?
Crucially, it made potential investors incredibly nervous. They saw BA, this giant, powerful incumbent, willing to engage in protracted, expensive legal battles and other hardball tactics. The risk of getting tied up in litigation, even if Virgin might eventually win, became too high.
So the threat of using power, the threat of legal attrition was enough.
It was enough to scare off the financial backers Branson needed to grow. It shows how power can crush competition, not just through market means, but by creating an environment of prohibitive risk and uncertainty, using the system itself as a weapon. #outro. So, when you pull back and look at all these threads, from Gates setting the standard, to Bezos using low margins as a shield, Jobs building a mythology, Zuckerberg leveraging the social graph, even the dynamics in science and AI, there's definitely a pattern.
What's the core pattern you see?
It's this potent mix. You need visionary product development, absolutely. You need immense financial resources and commitment, often over years. But critically, you also need these ruthless, strategic, competitive tactics. Tactics designed not just to outcompete, but often to reshape the market entirely, to make future competition incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
Establish dominance and then lock it down.
Exactly. And what's fascinating and consistent across all these eras is what happens after they achieve that dominance. The main strategic challenge shifts
From winning the market
to managing public perception, managing regulators, avoiding accountability for the downsides, the externalities of their enormous power. The fight moves from the marketplace to the court of public opinion and political influence.
And that brings us to a really complex point now, doesn't it?
It really does. The game has changed again.
Consider, for example, the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma, the company behind OxyContin. Our sources touch on how they manage their image.
They were incredibly effective for a long time at using PR and philanthropy.
Right. Pouring money into museums, universities, ensuring the Sackler name was associated with art and science, while simultaneously working very hard to keep the family name disconnected from the opioid crisis in the media narrative, trying to make the source of the fortune seem obscure and distant.
A classic strategy of separating the positive brand of the family's philanthropy from the negative source of the wealth.
But here's the kicker for today's tech titans. They don't just use the media landscape. In many ways, they control it. They own the platforms where information is shared, where history is written, where accountability is debated.
The search results, the social feeds, the news algorithms.
Exactly. So the final question we want to leave you with is this. How long can this generation of tech giants successfully manage that separation? How long can they keep their brand associated primarily with innovation and connection while potentially obscuring the less savory aspects or consequences of their dominance, especially when they control the very tools that shape the narratives?
Will the historical record they themselves curate ultimately reflect the full picture? Or will their power allow them to maintain the positive image indefinitely?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Always more to explore. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.